The horizon blurred as the waves rose and fell, hiding the nightmare lurking below. An instant later, the surface shattered, and the predator's maw closed like a vice. Blood and seawater mingled in the chaos, painting the ocean with fear. There was no time to scream, no time to think, only the instinct to survive. But the predator was faster, stronger, and far more determined. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start with today's shark attack story, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment letting me know where in the world you are watching from. Click the like button, and let's get into the story. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Bill Thompson loaded his kayak onto the roof of his weathered Ford pickup. At 50 years old, his salt and pepper hair ruffled by the early morning breeze, Bill moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had performed this ritual countless times before. The gentle lapping of waves against the shoreline and the distant cries of seagulls formed a familiar backdrop to his preparations. As he secured the last strap, his wife Sarah emerged from their modest beach house, clutching a thermos of coffee. "You're up early, even for you," she said, handing him the warm container. Bill accepted it with a grateful smile. "Fish don't sleep in, darling, neither should I." Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. "Just be careful out there, okay? The news said there have been more shark sightings than usual this season." Bill chuckled, his laugh lines deepening. "You worry too much. I've been fishing these waters for 30 years, I know what I'm doing." I know, Sarah sighed, reaching up to straighten the collar of his faded plaid shirt. "It's my job to worry. Promise me you'll be back for dinner?" "Wouldn't miss your famous crab cakes for the world," Bill replied, planting a quick kiss on her cheek. He climbed into the truck, the engine rumbling to life. As he pulled out of the driveway, he caught a glimpse of Sarah in the rearview mirror, her hand raised in a wave, silhouetted against the warm glow of their porch light. The drive to his favorite launch spot was short, the roads of the Outer Banks still quiet in the early morning hours. Bill hummed along to an old country tune on the radio, his mind already out on the water. As he pulled into the small parking area near the beach, he noticed he was the only one there. "Perfect," he thought. "Just me and the fish today." Unloading his kayak with practiced ease, Bill paused to take in the scene before him. The Atlantic stretched out to the horizon, its surface a canvas of pink and gold hues reflected from the rising sun. The beach was empty, save for a few early rising sandpipers skittering along the water's edge. "Can't beat this view," Bill murmured to himself, inhaling deeply. The salty air filled his lungs, invigorating him for the day ahead. He dragged his kayak down to the water's edge, the bottom of the boat scraping softly against the sand. After securing his fishing gear and attaching his safety whistle to his life vest, Bill pushed off into the gentle surf. The familiar motion of paddling settled into his muscles as he made his way past the breakers and into calmer waters. About a mile offshore, Bill found his usual spot, marked by a barely visible buoy. He'd discovered this location years ago, a sweet spot where the currents brought in a variety of fish. Settling in, he cast his line with a practiced flick of his wrist. "All right, fellas," he said to the unseen fish below. "Let's see who's hungry this morning." The next few hours passed in a pleasant rhythm of casting, reeling, and the occasional catch. Bill's cooler slowly filled with a modest haul, a couple of spotted seat route, a small bluefish, and a respectable red drum. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth tempered by the cool ocean breeze. As midday approached, Bill wiped the sweat from his brow and reached for his water bottle. Taking a long drink, he surveyed his surroundings. The shoreline was a distant strip of sand, and a few boats dotted the horizon. But he was essentially alone out here, just the way he liked it. "One more cast," he decided aloud. "Then I'll head back in." Baiting his hook with a fresh piece of cut bait, Bill cast his line out, the lure landing with a soft plop some distance away. He settled back, enjoying the gentle rock of his kayak on the swells. Unbeknownst to Bill, beneath the surface, the scent of his catches and the vibrations from his kayak had attracted attention. A large tiger shark, drawn by the promise of an easy meal, glided silently into the area. Its powerful tail propelled it effortlessly through the water, its keen senses homing in on Bill's location. Above the surface, Bill felt a strong tug on his line. His eyes widened with excitement. "Whoa, this feels like a big one," he exclaimed, gripping his rod tightly. The line went taut, the rod bending dramatically. Bill leaned forward, his heart racing with the thrill of the catch. "Come on, you beauty," he muttered, beginning to reel in his line. The fish on the other end fought hard, and Bill found himself pulled slightly to one side of his kayak. As he focused on his rod, Bill failed to notice a dark shape approaching just below the surface. The tiger shark, now mere yards away, sensed the struggling fish and accelerated, its powerful body cutting through the water with deadly precision. Bill continued to battle with his catch, oblivious to the danger lurking beneath. "Almost got you," he grunted, leaning further over the side of his kayak to get a glimpse of his prize. In that moment, as Bill peered into the water, the ocean's surface exploded. The tiger shark, in pursuit of the hooked fish, breached with terrifying speed and force. Its massive jaws, lined with rows of serrated teeth, clamped down on the side of Bill's kayak, mere inches from where his hand gripped the gunwale. The impact sent a shockwave through the small vessel, nearly capsizing it. Bill recoiled in horror, his fishing rod forgotten as it clattered into the bottom of the kayak. "Jesus Christ!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. The shark thrashed violently, its powerful body twisting as it tried to get a better grip on what it had mistaken for prey. The kayak tilted dangerously, water sloshing over the sides. Bill clung desperately to the opposite edge, his knuckles white with the effort to keep from being thrown into the shark-infested waters. As suddenly as it had appeared, the shark released its grip and slipped back beneath the waves. The kayak rocked wildly in the aftermath, water sloshing around Bill's feet. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Oh God," Bill muttered, his eyes darting frantically across the water's surface. The previously tranquil sea now seemed ominous and alien. He could see the puncture marks left by the shark's teeth in the side of his kayak, a stark reminder of how close he had come to disaster. With shaking hands, Bill reached for his paddle, his mind racing. Shore. He needed to get back to shore, but as he looked around, he realized with growing horror that in the chaos of the attack, he had lost his bearings. The coastline was a distant smudge, offering no clear direction. As the reality of his situation sank in, Bill felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean spray. He was alone, disoriented, and there was a large, aggressive shark circling somewhere beneath him. The day that had started so peacefully had turned into a nightmare, and Bill Thompson found himself in a desperate fight for survival, with no idea of the terrors that still awaited him. Bill Thompson's hands trembled as he gripped his paddle, his eyes darting across the water's surface. The calm sea that had welcomed him earlier now seemed treacherous, hiding untold dangers beneath its deceptively placid surface. His breath came in short, sharp gasps as he tried to calm his racing heart. "Get it together, Bill," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of waves against his kayak. "You've got to think clearly." As he scanned the horizon, searching for familiar landmarks, a glint of something metallic caught his eye. His fishing rod, forgotten in the chaos of the shark's initial attack, lay at his feet. The line was still taut, stretching out into the water. A flicker of hope ignited in Bill's chest. Maybe if he could reel in his catch, it would distract the shark long enough for him to make a break for shore. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. With cautious movements, Bill reached for the rod, his eyes never leaving the water around him. As his fingers closed around the familiar grip, he felt a sense of comfort, however small. This, at least, he knew how to handle. "Okay, let's see what we've got here," he said, his voice steadier now that he had a plan of action. He began to reel in the line slowly, feeling the weight and pull of whatever was on the other end. The tension in the line increased as Bill continued to reel. Whatever he had hooked, it was big. Under normal circumstances, he would have been thrilled at the prospect of such a catch. Now it filled him with dread. Suddenly, the water about 20 feet from his kayak erupted. A large fish, perhaps a tuna, breached the surface, thrashing wildly. Bill's eyes widened as he saw the reason for its frantic behavior. The massive form of the tiger shark was right behind it, jaws open wide. "Oh Christ!" Bill exclaimed, instinctively jerking back on the rod. The movement was enough to throw him off balance, and he felt his kayak tilt dangerously to one side. Time seemed to slow as Bill watched the shark's powerful body propel it out of the water. Its rough, striped skin glistened in the sunlight, droplets of water cascading off its massive form. The shark's black, lifeless eyes locked onto Bill, and in that moment, he felt a primal fear unlike anything he had ever experienced. The shark's jaws clamped down on the hooked fish, severing Bill's line with ease. The sudden lack of tension sent Bill tumbling backwards in his kayak, his head narrowly missing the edge as he fell. As quickly as it had appeared, the shark vanished beneath the waves, leaving behind a spreading pool of blood from its catch. Bill lay on his back, gasping for air, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he whispered, crossing himself with a shaking hand. The reality of his situation hit him like a physical blow. He was alone, miles from shore, with a large, aggressive predator circling beneath him. Forcing himself to sit up, Bill took stock of his situation. His kayak, while damaged from the first attack, was still seaworthy. He still had his paddle, and miraculously his emergency whistle was still attached to his life vest. But these small comforts did little to alleviate the overwhelming sense of dread that had settled over him. As he contemplated his next move, a dark shadow passed beneath his kayak. Bill froze, hardly daring to breathe. The shadow circled slowly, growing larger as it approached the surface. "No, no, no," Bill murmured, his eyes wide with fear. He gripped his paddle tightly, ready to use it as a makeshift weapon if necessary. The water bulged slightly as the shark's dorsal fin broke the surface, cutting through the water with terrifying precision. It circled Bill's kayak once, twice, 3 times, each pass bringing it closer. Bill's mind raced, recalling fragments of information about shark behavior. "They're just curious," he said aloud, trying to convince himself. "They don't really want to eat humans. Just stay calm, don't make any sudden movements." But as the shark began its 4th pass, Bill saw its tail dip lower in the water, a telltale sign that it was preparing to charge. In that moment, survival instinct overrode all else. With a yell that was part fear and part defiance, Bill brought his paddle down hard on the water's surface, right in front of the approaching shark. The loud slap and sudden movement startled the predator, causing it to veer away at the last second. "Yeah, that's right," Bill shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Get out of here!" But his victory was short-lived. The shark, momentarily startled but not deterred, circled back. This time, it approached from behind, out of Bill's line of sight. Bill sensed the danger too late. He turned just in time to see the shark's massive form rocketing up from the depths. Its powerful body slammed into the kayak from below, the impact lifting the small vessel partially out of the water. The force of the collision sent Bill tumbling into the ocean. The shock of the cold water drove the air from his lungs, and for a terrifying moment, he couldn't tell which way was up. His life vest brought him to the surface, and he broke through, gasping and spluttering. "Help!" he cried out instinctively, though he knew there was no one around to hear. The taste of salt water was sharp in his mouth as he tried to orientate himself. His kayak had overturned and was floating a few feet away. Bill knew he needed to get back to it. It was his only chance of survival. But as he began to swim towards it, a chilling realization stopped him cold. He was in the water, with the shark. The thought had barely formed when he felt something brush against his leg. It wasn't the rough texture of shark skin, but the unmistakable touch of a fishing line. With horror, Bill realized he was tangled in his own fishing line. The very tool that had served him so well for years was now a potential death sentence, restricting his movement in shark-infested waters. Panic threatened to overwhelm him as he thrashed in the water, trying desperately to free himself. Each movement seemed to tangle the line further, wrapping around his legs like some malevolent sea creature. Come on," Bill muttered through gritted teeth, his fingers working frantically to loosen the line. But the more he struggled, the tighter it seemed to become. A shadow passed beneath him, and Bill's blood ran cold. The shark was coming back, drawn by his frantic movements in the water. He could see its dorsal fin cutting through the waves, heading straight for him. In that moment, facing what he was sure would be his death, Bill Thompson's mind went to his wife, Sarah. He thought of her standing in their driveway that morning waving goodbye. He thought of the promise he'd made to return for dinner. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered, closing his eyes as the shark drew nearer. "I'm so sorry." The shark's fin disappeared beneath the surface as it made its final approach. Bill held his breath, every muscle in his body tensed for the impending attack. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as Bill braced for the worst, a loud mechanical roar cut through the air. His eyes snapped open to see a fishing boat approaching in the distance, its engine breaking the tension-filled silence. The shark, startled by the noise, veered away at the last second. Its massive body brushed past Bill, close enough for him to feel the rush of water displaced by its movement. As the shark retreated, Bill found new strength. With renewed desperation, he clawed at the fishing line, finally managing to loosen its grip. Free at last, he struck out for his overturned kayak, his arms burning with the effort. Reaching the relative safety of his vessel, Bill clung to it, his chest heaving as he gulped in air. The fishing boat was drawing nearer, its occupants having spotted him in the water. As he waited for rescue, Bill kept a wary eye on the surrounding water. The shark was still out there, he knew, biding its time. And while this immediate danger might soon pass, Bill understood with chilling clarity that his ordeal was far from over. The calm morning that had promised a peaceful day of fishing had descended into a nightmare of primal terror. And as the rescue boat drew nearer, Bill Thompson found himself forever changed, marked by his brush with one of nature's most perfect predators. The fishing boat's engine grew louder as it approached, a beacon of hope in Bill Thompson's watery nightmare. He clung to his overturned kayak, his arms trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the ocean's surface into a blinding mirror that made it difficult to gauge the boat's distance. "Hey, over here!" Bill shouted. "Here!" His voice hoarse. He waved one arm frantically, unwilling to let go of the kayak completely. "Help!" As the boat drew nearer, Bill could make out two figures on deck. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. A dark shadow passed beneath him, a chilling reminder that the tiger shark was still circling, waiting for an opportunity to strike. "Hurry!" Bill yelled, panic rising in his throat. "There's a shark!" The boat slowed as it approached, and Bill could now see the concerned faces of the two men on board. One of them, a weathered old sailor with a salt and pepper beard, called out, "Hang on, buddy, we're coming." The younger man, probably in his 30s, grabbed a life preserver and prepared to throw it. "Can you swim to us?" he shouted. Bill's eyes darted nervously to the water around him. I don't know. The shark, it's still out there." The older man's face grew grim. "All right, stay put, we'll come to you." As the boat inched closer, Bill felt a sudden, powerful tug on his kayak. The shark, emboldened by the commotion or perhaps frustrated by its elusive prey, had latched onto the small vessel. "Oh God!" Bill cried out as he was jerked violently to one side. He lost his grip on the kayak and plunged back into the water. The world became a chaos of bubbles and muffled sounds as Bill tumbled beneath the surface. Panic gripped him as he fought to orientate himself. His lungs burned, screaming for air. With desperate strokes, he clawed his way back to the surface, breaking through with a gasping breath. "He's in the water," he heard one of the men yell. "Get the gaff!" Bill thrashed in the water, trying to keep his head above the surface. He could see the boat tantalizingly close, but fear paralyzed him. The shark was out there, invisible but present, a looming threat in the vast blue. "Swim!" the younger man on the boat shouted. "Swim to us! Now!" Spurred by the urgency in the man's voice, Bill began to paddle towards the boat. Each stroke was an agony of fear and exertion. He expected at any moment to feel the brutal impact of the shark's attack. He was about halfway to the boat when he felt something brush against his leg. Bill's heart nearly stopped. This was it. This was how it would end. But the touch wasn't the rough hide of a shark. It was the smooth rubber of the life preserver. "Grab it!" the older man yelled. Bill's fingers closed around the life preserver with desperate strength. As the men on the boat began to pull him in, he felt a sudden, tremendous force yank him backwards. The shark had returned, its massive jaws clamping down on Bill's left calf. Pain exploded through his body, a searing agony that drove all thought from his mind. He screamed, a primal sound of fear and anguish that tore through the air. "Hold on," one of the men shouted, but Bill could barely hear him over the rushing in his ears. He was being pulled in two directions, towards safety by the men on the boat, and towards death by the relentless predator. The water around Bill turned red with his blood. He could feel the shark's teeth tearing through muscle and sinew. In that moment, suspended between rescue and doom, a strange calm came over Bill. He thought of Sarah, of their life together, of all the things he'd left unsaid that morning. Then, as suddenly as it had attacked, the shark released its grip. Perhaps confused by the taste of human flesh or deterred by the constant pulling from the boat, it retreated into the depths. Bill felt himself being hauled rapidly towards the boat. Rough hands grabbed him, pulling him over the gunwale and onto the deck. He collapsed, shivering and gasping, as the reality of what had just happened washed over him. "Jesus Christ," the younger man muttered, his face pale as he looked at Bill's mangled leg. "We need to stop the bleeding." The older man was already moving, grabbing a first aid kit from a nearby compartment. "What's your name, son?" he asked Bill, his voice gruff but kind. "B. Bill," he managed to stammer through chattering teeth. "Bill Thompson." "All right, Bill, I'm Jack, and this here's my nephew. Tom, we're gonna take care of you, okay? But I won't lie to you. This is gonna hurt like hell." As Jack began to clean and bandage the wound, Bill gritted his teeth against the pain. Tom kept watch, his eyes scanning the water around the boat. "It's still out there," Tom said, his voice tight with tension. "I can see its fin." Jack nodded grimly. "We need to get back to shore fast. Tom, get us moving. I'll stay with Bill." As the boat's engine roared to life, Bill felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. The loss of blood, combined with the adrenaline crash, was taking its toll. "Sarah," he murmured, his thoughts growing fuzzy. "I need to call Sarah." "Your wife?" Jack asked, applying pressure to the wound. When Bill nodded weakly, Jack continued, "We'll call her as soon as we hit the shore, Bill. You just focus on staying awake for me, okay?" The boat cut through the waves, its speed sending sprays of water over the bow. Bill lay on the deck, staring up at the cloudless sky. The pain in his leg had faded to a dull throb, but he knew that was probably a bad sign. "Tell me about Sarah," Jack said, clearly trying to keep Bill conscious. "How long you two been married?" Bill smiled faintly, grateful for the distraction. 28 years next month," he said. She told me to be careful this morning. Said there'd been more shark sightings lately." Jack chuckled softly. "Wives have a way of knowing, don't they? My Eleanor's the same way." As they talked, Bill could feel his strength ebbing. The gentle rocking of the boat and the steady hum of its engine were lulling him towards unconsciousness. He fought against it, knowing somewhere in the back of his mind that falling asleep could be dangerous. "Stay with me, Bill." Jack's voice seemed to come from far away. "We're almost there. You can see the shore now." Bill turned his head slightly, and through his blurring vision he could indeed make out the distant line of the coast. So close. Yet it seemed an impossible distance in his current state. As they neared the shore, Tom cut the engine, allowing the boat to drift into shallower waters. "I can see the emergency services," he called out. "They're waiting on the beach." Jack nodded, relief evident on his weathered face. "Hear that, Bill? Help's here. You're gonna be okay." But Bill was fading fast. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the concerned face of a paramedic leaning over him. Then, mercifully, the pain and fear receded, replaced by a deep, enveloping blackness. As unconsciousness took hold, Bill's mind drifted. He saw Sarah standing on their porch, bathed in the warm glow of sunset. She was smiling, her arms outstretched, welcoming him home. In this vision, there was no pain, no fear, no circling predators from the deep. There was only love, warmth, and the promise of safety. "I'm coming home." "Sarah," Bill thought, or perhaps said aloud. "I promised I'd be back for dinner." And with that, Bill Thompson slipped into the depths of unconsciousness, his fate now in the hands of the paramedics racing him to the hospital. The terror of the shark attack had ended, but the true struggle, the fight for his life and the long road to recovery, was only just beginning. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment pierced through the fog of Bill Thompson's consciousness. His eyelids fluttered open, then quickly shut against the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. Disorientation washed over him as he tried to piece together where he was and why. "Bill, can you hear me?" A soft, familiar voice cut through his confusion. Sarah, his wife. He forced his eyes open again, blinking rapidly to adjust to the light. Sarah's worried face came into focus, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but a relieved smile playing on her lips. "Sarah," Bill croaked, his throat dry and scratchy. What happened?" Sarah's hand tightened around his. "You were attacked by a shark, honey. Do you remember?" The memories came flooding back in a rush of terror and pain. The initial strike, the struggle in the water, the searing agony as the shark's teeth tore into his leg. Bill's heart rate spiked, the monitors beside his bed beeping more rapidly. "Easy, Mr. Thompson," a new voice said. A nurse had entered the room, alerted by the change in his vitals. "Try to stay calm. You're safe now." Bill took a few deep breaths, willing his heart to slow. "My leg," he managed to say, fear evident in his voice. "Is it still there?" Sarah assured him quickly. "The doctors were able to save it, but, well, there's a long road ahead, Bill." Before Bill could ask for more details, the door opened again, admitting a tall, distinguished-looking man in a white coat. "Ah, Mr. Thompson, good to see you awake. I'm Dr. Reeves, the surgeon who worked on your leg." Bill tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his body. "How bad is it, Doc?" Dr. Reeves pulled up a chair, his expression serious but not unkind. "The shark did significant damage to your calf muscle and severed several tendons. We've repaired what we could, but you're looking at multiple surgeries and extensive physical therapy." The news hit Bill like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, trying to process what this meant for his future. Will I be able to walk again?" "With time and hard work, yes," Dr. Reeves said. "But I want to be clear, Mr. Thompson. This isn't going to be an easy recovery. You're going to face challenges, both physical and mental." As if on cue, a sharp pain lanced through Bill's leg. He gritted his teeth, squeezing Sarah's hand tightly. "I'll increase your pain medication," the nurse said, moving to adjust his IV. As the pain subsided to a dull throb, Bill found his thoughts drifting back to the attack. The memory of the shark's lifeless black eyes as it charged towards him sent a shiver down his spine. "The men on the boat," Bill said suddenly, turning to Sarah. "Jack and Tom. They're fine," Sarah assured him. "They've been by to check on you a couple of times. They saved your life, Bill." A knock on the door interrupted them. A police officer entered, notepad in hand. "Mr. Thompson? I'm Officer Martinez. I know this isn't the best time, but I need to take your statement about the attack." Dr. Reeves frowned. "Is this really necessary right now? My patient needs rest." "It's okay, Doc," Bill said, his voice stronger now. "I want to get this over with." As Bill recounted the events of that fateful day, he found himself reliving every terrifying moment. The initial strike that nearly capsized his kayak, the heart-stopping seconds as he realized he was in the water with the shark, the excruciating pain as its teeth tore into his flesh. "And you're certain it was a tiger shark?" Officer Martinez asked, scribbling in his notepad. Bill nodded grimly. "No doubt about it, I've been fishing these waters for decades. I know a tiger shark when I see one." The officer made a final note, then closed his pad. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. This will help with the official report and any decisions about beach closures or warnings." As Officer Martinez left, Bill sank back into his pillows, exhausted by the effort of reliving the attack. Sarah stroked his arm gently, her face etched with concern. "You should rest now," Dr. Reeves said, standing. "We'll talk more about your recovery plan tomorrow." But as the room fell quiet and Sarah dozed in the chair beside him, Bill found sleep elusive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shark charging towards him, jaws open wide. He could almost feel the cold ocean water closing over his head, the panic of not knowing which way was up. A soft knock on the door roused Sarah from her light sleep. Jack and Tom, the fishermen who had rescued Bill, entered the room hesitantly. "Hope we're not intruding," Jack said, his weathered face creased with concern. "We just wanted to check on you." Bill managed a weak smile. "You saved my life." "You're welcome anytime." Tom shifted uncomfortably, guilt evident in his eyes. We should have gotten to you faster, if we had. Don't, Bill interrupted. You did everything you could. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you two. Jack nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. We found this tangled in what was left of your kayak, he said, holding out Bill's wedding ring. Thought you might want it back. Sarah gasped softly, taking the ring and slipping it back onto Bill's finger. The familiar weight of it was comforting, a tangible link to his life before the attack. As Jack and Tom left, promising to visit again soon, Bill found himself overcome with emotion. The reality of how close he had come to death hit him full force. Tears welled up in his eyes, and for the first time since the attack, he let them fall freely. Sarah held him as he wept, murmuring words of comfort. It's okay, honey. Let it out. You're safe now. You're alive. In the quiet of the hospital room, with Sarah's arms around him, Bill finally began to process the trauma he had endured. The physical wounds would heal with time, but he knew the emotional scars would run much deeper. As exhaustion finally overtook him and he drifted towards sleep, Bill's mind returned to the moment in the water when he thought all was lost. He had made peace with death then, had said his silent goodbyes. But fate or luck or the bravery of two fishermen had given him a second chance. I'm still here, he whispered, half to himself and half to Sarah. I made it. Sarah kissed his forehead gently. Yes, you did. And we'll get through this together, one day at a time. As sleep claimed him at last, Bill's dreams were a chaotic mix of terrifying memories and hopeful visions of the future. The shark still lurked in the depths of his subconscious, a shadow that he knew would haunt him for years to come. But alongside it was the image of Sarah, of their home, of the life they would continue to build together. The attack had changed him, had shown him the fragility of life and the raw power of nature, but it had also revealed the strength within himself, the love of his wife, and the kindness of strangers. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, Bill Thompson knew that while the road ahead would be challenging, he was ready to face it. The beeping of the heart monitor slowed to a steady rhythm, matching the calm rise and fall of Bill's chest. Outside his room, nurses and doctors continued their rounds, the hospital humming with the quiet energy of healing and hope. And somewhere out in the vast ocean, life went on, the tiger shark continuing its ancient dance of survival, unaware of the profound impact it had had on one man's life. The early morning sun filtered through the hospital room's blinds, casting long shadows across Bill Thompson's bed. He had been here for a week now, each day a grueling cycle of pain management, wound care, and the first tentative steps towards physical therapy. The constant beeping of monitors had become a sort of white noise, a reminder that he was alive, despite everything. Bill stirred, wincing as he shifted position. The pain in his leg was a constant presence, sometimes a dull throb, other times a searing agony that took his breath away. He glanced at the clock, 5:43 a.m. Another sleepless night. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of Nurse Chen, her familiar face a welcome sight in the sterile hospital environment. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice low and soothing. "How are we feeling today?" Bill managed a weak smile. "About as well as can be expected, I suppose. And please call me Bill." Nurse Chen nodded, moving to check his vitals. "Any pain?" "Nothing I can't handle," Bill lied, gritting his teeth as another wave of discomfort washed over him. Nurse Chen gave him a knowing look. "There's no need to be brave, Bill. Managing your pain is an important part of your recovery." As she adjusted his medication, Bill's thoughts drifted to the upcoming procedure. Dr. Reeves had scheduled another surgery for later that day, an attempt to repair more of the damage done by the shark's powerful jaws. "Nervous about the surgery?" Nurse Chen asked, noticing his furrowed brow. Bill nodded. "A bit. Dr. Reeves says it's necessary, but..." He trailed off, unable to voice his fears. "But you're scared," Nurse Chen finished for him. "That's perfectly normal, Bill. You've been through a traumatic experience. It's okay to be afraid." Her words of reassurance were interrupted by another knock at the door. Sarah entered, looking tired, but managing a smile for her husband. "You're here early," Bill said, reaching out for her hand. Sarah squeezed his fingers gently. "Couldn't sleep? Thought I'd come sit with you before the surgery." As Nurse Chen excused herself, Sarah settled into the chair beside Bill's bed. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. "I spoke to Jack yesterday," Sarah said eventually. "He and Tom want to visit again if you're up for it." Bill nodded. "I'd like that. I owe them so much." "They're just glad you're okay," Sarah replied. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. They told me more about what happened out there, about how close it was." Bill closed his eyes, the memories of that day surging back with vivid intensity. The cold water, the shark's relentless pursuit, the moment he thought it was all over. "I keep seeing it, Sarah," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Every time I close my eyes, I can't shake it." Sarah leaned in, pressing her forehead against his. "You're safe now, Bill. You're here with me. We'll get through this together." Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Reeves, his presence filling the small room. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson," he greeted them. "How are we feeling today?" Bill straightened up, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "Ready to get this over with, Doc." Dr. Reeves nodded, his expression serious but not unkind. "I know you're anxious, but this surgery is a crucial step in your recovery. We'll be repairing some of the deeper muscle damage and working on the tendons in your calf. It's going to be a long procedure, but it's necessary if we want to maximize your chances of regaining full mobility." As the doctor explained the details of the surgery, Bill found his attention wandering. He thought about his kayak, probably nothing more than splinters now. He thought about the ocean, once a source of peace and joy, now tainted by fear and pain. "Mr. Thompson?" Dr. Reeves's voice broke through his reverie. "Do you have any questions?" Bill shook his head, then paused. "Actually, yes. When will I be able to go home?" Dr. Reeves considered for a moment. "It's hard to say for certain. Much will depend on how this surgery goes and how well you progress with physical therapy. But if all goes well, perhaps in another week or two." The thought of going home filled Bill with a mix of longing and apprehension. He missed the comfort of his own bed, the familiar rhythms of his life. But he also knew that leaving the hospital meant facing a world that now seemed fraught with hidden dangers. As Dr. Reeves left to prepare for the surgery, a commotion in the hallway caught Bill's attention. Raised voices and the sound of hurried footsteps preceded the arrival of a frantic-looking young man at his door. "Is this Bill Thompson's room?" the man asked, his eyes wild. "The man who was attacked by the shark?" Sarah stood, placing herself protectively between the stranger and Bill's bed. "Yes, but who are you?" The man ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself. I'm Mike Callahan. I was attacked too. Yesterday, just off Pea Island." Bill felt a chill run down his spine. "Another attack? So soon?" Mike nodded, his face pale. "They said on the news that you'd been attacked last week. I needed to talk to someone who understood. The doctors, the cops, they all mean well, but they don't know what it's like." Bill gestured for Mike to enter the room. As the young man approached, Bill could see the heavy bandages on his arm and shoulder. "How bad?" Bill asked softly. Mike sank into a chair, his eyes haunted. "Bad enough. Lost a chunk of my shoulder. Doctor says I might not get full use of my arm back. But I'm alive, which is more than I thought I'd be when that thing came at me." For the next hour, Bill and Mike talked, sharing their experiences in a way they couldn't with anyone else. They spoke of the terror, the pain, the moment when they each thought it was the end. But they also spoke of survival, of the strange gratitude they felt for every breath, every heartbeat. As the time for Bill's surgery approached, Mike stood to leave. "Thanks for talking with me," he said. It helps, knowing I'm not alone in this." Bill nodded, feeling a connection with this stranger who had endured the same nightmare. "We're survivors, Mike. Remember that." As Mike left, Sarah turned to Bill, her face etched with concern. "You okay?" Bill took a deep breath. "Yeah, I think I am." Talking with Mike, it put things in perspective. We're both alive. We both have a chance to recover, to move forward. Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "That's my brave man." When the orderlies came to take Bill to surgery, he felt a new resolve. The road ahead would be hard, filled with pain and challenges. But he had survived the unsurvivable. He had faced nature's perfect predator and lived to tell the tale. As they wheeled him out of the room, Bill caught a glimpse of the ocean through a window in the hallway. It stretched out to the horizon, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. He knew that one day he would have to face that vast blue expanse again, to confront his fears and reclaim the peace he once found there. But for now, he had a different battle to fight. As the anesthesia began to take effect, Bill's last conscious thought was of Sarah, of Mike, of all the people who were fighting alongside him. With their support, and with the strength he had discovered within himself, he knew he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The operating room doors swung shut, and Bill Thompson, survivor of nature's fury, slipped into a healing sleep, ready to take the next step on his long journey to recovery. The operating room buzzed with focused energy as Dr. Reeves and his team worked meticulously on Bill Thompson's leg. Hours ticked by, the steady beep of monitors and the soft clinking of surgical instruments providing a rhythmic backdrop to their efforts. In the waiting room, Sarah Thompson sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the double doors leading to the surgical ward. Every time they swung open, her heart leaped, only to sink again as another family received news of their loved one. "Mrs. Thompson." Sarah looked up to see Jack and Tom, the fishermen who had rescued Bill, standing awkwardly before her. Their weathered faces were etched with concern. "How is he?" Jack asked, his voice gruff with emotion. Sarah managed a weak smile. "Still in surgery. It's been..." She glanced at her watch. "Almost 5 hours now." Tom shifted uncomfortably. We brought something for Bill," he said, holding out a small wooden box. "Figured he might like something to keep his hands busy during recovery." Sarah took the box, opening it to reveal an intricately carved miniature fishing boat. The detail was exquisite, right down to the tiny fishing rods and nets. "Tom made it," Jack explained. "He's got a talent for whittling." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "It's beautiful. Bill will love it. Thank you both, not just for this, but for everything. If you hadn't been there that day..." Jack placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Now don't you go thinking about what ifs. Bill's a fighter. He'll pull through this." As if on cue, the doors swung open once more and Dr. Reeves emerged, still in his surgical scrubs. Sarah stood quickly, her heart pounding. "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Reeves said, his face unreadable. "The surgery was complex, but I'm pleased to say it was successful. We were able to repair more of the muscle damage than we initially thought possible." Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "So he'll be okay?" Dr. Reeves nodded cautiously. "He has a long road ahead, but yes, I believe he will make a good recovery. He's being moved to post-op now. You can see him in about an hour." As the doctor left, Sarah turned to Jack and Tom, tears of relief streaming down her face. The two men enveloped her in a warm embrace, their own eyes moist with emotion. Meanwhile, in the post-operative recovery room, Bill Thompson was slowly emerging from the fog of anesthesia. The world came back to him in disjointed fragments. The antiseptic smell of the hospital, the distant murmur of voices, the dull ache in his leg gradually sharpening into more defined pain. "Welcome back, Mr. Thompson," a soft voice said. Nurse Chen's face swam into focus above him. "How are you feeling?" Bill tried to speak, but his throat was dry and raw from the intubation tube. Nurse Chen offered him a few ice chips, which he gratefully accepted. "The surgery went well," she explained as she checked his vitals. "Dr. Reeves will be by later to give you more details, but for now, just rest." As the effects of the anesthesia wore off, Bill became more aware of his surroundings. The recovery room was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the harsh brightness of the operating theater. Other patients lay in nearby beds, each in various stages of waking. Bill's mind wandered, memories of the attack mixing with fragmented dreams from his anesthetized state. He saw the shark again, its black eyes rolling back as it charged towards him. But this time, the scene shifted. He was back on his kayak, the ocean calm and inviting. Fish jumped in graceful arcs around him, their scales glittering in the sunlight. "Bill? Can you hear me, honey?" Sarah's voice cut through his reverie. Bill opened his eyes to find his wife standing beside his bed, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Sarah?" he croaked, his voice still rough. "How long?" "You've been out for about 7 hours," she said, stroking his hand gently. "The surgery took longer than expected, but Dr. Reeves says it went well." Bill nodded, wincing slightly as the movement sent a twinge of pain through his body. Did they save the leg?" Sarah's eyes welled up with tears. "Yes, honey, they saved it. It's going to be a long recovery, but you're going to be okay." As Sarah filled him in on the details of the surgery, Bill's gaze drifted to the window. The sky outside was turning a deep orange as the sun began to set. It reminded him of countless evenings spent on the water, watching the day fade into night from the deck of his boat. "I brought you something," Sarah said, breaking into his thoughts. She reached into her bag and pulled out the wooden miniature boat that Tom had carved. "Jack and Tom came by while you were in surgery. Tom made this for you." Bill took the boat with trembling hands, marveling at the intricate details. As he ran his fingers over the smooth wood, he felt a lump form in his throat. This small gesture of kindness from the men who had saved his life touched him deeply. "I'll have to thank them," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Just then Dr. Reeves entered the room, his face tired but satisfied. "Mr. Thompson, good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" Bill considered the question. The pain in his leg was significant but somehow more manageable than before. "Better, I think." "What's the verdict, Doc?" Dr. Reeves pulled up a chair, his expression serious but not grim. "The surgery was more successful than we initially hoped. We were able to repair a significant amount of the muscle damage and reconstruct several of the damaged tendons. There's still a long way to go, but I'm optimistic about your chances for a good recovery." Bill nodded, trying to process this information. "What's next?" "Rest for now," Dr. Reeves said firmly. "In a few days, we'll start with some gentle physical therapy. It's going to be challenging, Mr. Thompson, I won't sugarcoat it. You'll need to work hard, and there will be setbacks. But if you stick with it, I believe you can regain a good deal of function in that leg." As Dr. Reeves continued to explain the recovery process, Bill found his mind drifting again. He thought about the ocean, about the freedom he had always felt out on the water. Would he ever feel that again? Or would the memory of the attack forever taint the place he had loved for so long? "Bill, did you hear what Dr. Reeves said?" Sarah's voice brought him back to the present. Bill blinked, focusing on the doctor's face. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Dr. Reeves smiled understandingly. "I was saying that we'll be keeping you here for at least another week. After that, if your progress is good, we can discuss outpatient therapy options." After the doctor left, Sarah settled into the chair beside Bill's bed. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "I was so scared," Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I got that call, I thought I'd lost you." Bill squeezed her hand. "I'm still here, love. It'll take more than a shark to keep me away from you." Sarah managed a watery chuckle. "Don't joke about that. I don't think my heart could take another scare like this." As night fell, the hospital settled into its quieter rhythms. Nurses moved efficiently from room to room, checking on patients and administering medications. In the distance, the faint wail of an ambulance siren reminded them that life, with all its emergencies and dramas, continued on. Bill drifted in and out of sleep, his dreams a confusing mix of peaceful ocean scenes and terrifying recreations of the attack. Each time he startled awake, Sarah was there, her presence a constant comfort. In the early hours of the morning, Bill woke to find Sarah dozing in her chair, her hand still clasped in his. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of monitoring equipment casting strange shadows on the walls. For the first time since the attack, Bill allowed himself to really think about the future. The road ahead would be hard, filled with pain and frustration. There would be days when he would want to give up, when the effort seemed too much. But as he looked at Sarah, at the lines of worry etched on her sleeping face, he knew he had to keep fighting. He thought about Jack and Tom, about their bravery in the face of danger. He thought about Mike Callahan, another survivor learning to navigate this new, post-attack reality. And he thought about himself, not as a victim, but as a survivor. The shark had taken much from him, his sense of safety, his love for the ocean, perhaps even some of his physical abilities. But it hadn't taken everything. He was still here, still breathing, still loved. And as long as that was true, he had a chance to reclaim his life. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, Bill made a silent promise to himself. He would get through this. He would work hard, push through the pain, and find a way back to the life he loved. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be the same. But it would be his life, on his terms. The shark may have won the battle that day on the water, but Bill Thompson was determined to win the war. With Sarah by his side, and with the strength he was discovering within himself, he would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As he settled back into his pillow, feeling the dull ache in his leg and the warmth of Sarah's hand in his, Bill felt something he hadn't experienced since the attack: hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. And for now, that was enough. The sun rose over the hospital, marking the start of a new day. For Bill Thompson, it was more than that. It was the beginning of his journey back to health, back to strength, and back to the life he had nearly lost. The road would be long and hard, but he was ready to take the first step. The world beneath the waves was a blur of bubbles and muffled sounds as Bill Thompson fought desperately against the tiger shark's grip. The creature's powerful jaws had clamped down on his left arm, dragging him deeper into the murky depths of the Atlantic. Pain seared through his body, but it was overshadowed by a primal fear that threatened to overwhelm him. In the chaos of the moment, Bill's survival instincts kicked in. He remembered reading once that sharks were sensitive around their eyes and gills. With his free hand, he began to pummel the shark's snout, aiming for its black, lifeless eyes. The water around them turned red with Bill's blood, creating a crimson cloud that obscured his vision. He could feel his lungs burning, screaming for air. The pressure in his ears increased as they sank deeper, the surface becoming a distant memory. In those terrifying moments, time seemed to stretch. Bill's life flashed before his eyes. Sarah's smile on their wedding day, the birth of their daughter, lazy Sundays spent fishing on his beloved kayak. The thought of never seeing his family again filled him with a surge of determination. With renewed vigor, Bill continued his assault on the shark. His fist connected with its gills, and he felt the creature's grip loosen slightly. Taking advantage of the moment, he twisted his body, ignoring the searing pain as the shark's teeth tore through his flesh. Suddenly, miraculously, he was free. The shark, perhaps confused by the taste of human blood or deterred by Bill's counterattack, released its hold and disappeared into the murky water. Bill kicked frantically towards what he hoped was the surface, his injured arm trailing uselessly beside him. His vision began to darken around the edges as his oxygen-deprived brain struggled to function. Just as he thought he couldn't hold on any longer, his head broke the surface. He gasped, drawing in great lungfuls of air. The sudden influx of oxygen made him dizzy, and for a moment, he feared he might pass out and slip back under the waves. "Help!" he croaked, his voice weak and raspy. "Somebody help me!" To his immense relief, he heard the sound of an engine approaching. The fishing boat that had been attempting to rescue him before the shark attack was racing towards his position. "Over here!" Bill shouted, mustering all his remaining strength. He raised his uninjured arm, waving frantically. As the boat drew nearer, Bill could make out the figures of Jack and Tom, the two fishermen who had first spotted him in distress. Their faces were etched with concern and determination. "Hang on, buddy," Jack called out. "We're coming." But Bill's relief was short-lived. A dark shadow passed beneath him, and he felt his heart skip a beat. The shark was back. "Hurry!" he screamed, panic evident in his voice. "It's coming back." Tom, the younger of the two fishermen, grabbed a long gaff hook and leaned over the side of the boat. "Grab on!" he yelled, extending the hook towards Bill. Bill reached out with his good arm, his fingers straining to grasp the lifeline. Just as he felt the cold metal of the hook brush against his hand, something slammed into him from below. The impact drove the air from his lungs, and Bill found himself once again submerged. The shark, in its second attack, had missed his body but caught his legs, its rough skin leaving deep abrasions as it passed. Underwater once more, Bill's world narrowed to a singular focus: survive. He kicked hard, ignoring the pain in his legs and the throbbing agony of his mangled arm. The surface seemed impossibly far away, but he pushed on, driven by a desperate will to live. As he struggled upward, Bill caught a glimpse of the shark circling back for another pass. Its streamlined body cut through the water with terrifying efficiency, driven by millions of years of evolutionary perfection. In that moment, facing what he was sure would be his death, Bill Thompson's mind went to his family. He thought of Sarah, waiting at home for him to return from what was supposed to be a routine fishing trip. He thought of his daughter, Ashley, and the milestones he would miss. Her graduation, walking her down the aisle, holding his first grandchild. "I'm sorry," he thought, a sense of profound sadness washing over him. "I'm so sorry I won't be there." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as the shark was about to make its final, fatal attack, a large shadow passed overhead. The fishing boat had positioned itself directly above Bill, and he could see the blurred outline of something descending through the water towards him. It was Tom, the young fisherman, who had dived in to save him. With powerful strokes, Tom swam down to Bill, grabbing him around the chest with one arm while kicking hard towards the surface. The sudden movement seemed to confuse the shark, which veered away at the last second. Its massive body brushed past them, close enough for Bill to feel the rush of displaced water. Together, Bill and Tom broke the surface. Gasping for air, Jack was there in an instant, hauling them both into the boat with strength born of desperation. As soon as they were aboard, Jack gunned the engine, putting as much distance between them and the shark as possible. Bill collapsed on the deck, shivering uncontrollably, his body going into shock from the blood loss and trauma. "Stay with us, Bill," Jack said urgently, stripping off his own shirt to use as a makeshift tourniquet for Bill's mangled arm. "We're getting you to shore. Just hang on." Tom, still catching his breath from the rescue dive, fumbled for the boat's first aid kit. "I've called the Coast Guard," he reported. "They're sending a helicopter. Should be here in about 15 minutes. Bill nodded weakly, unable to form words. The pain in his arm was excruciating, but it was eclipsed by an overwhelming sense of relief. He was alive. Against all odds, he had survived. As Jack steered the boat towards shore and Tom did his best to staunch the bleeding, Bill found himself drifting in and out of consciousness. The adrenaline that had kept him going was wearing off, leaving him utterly drained. In his semi-conscious state, Bill's mind wandered. He saw Sarah again, but this time she wasn't waving goodbye from their driveway. She was standing on a beach, her arms outstretched, welcoming him home. The vision was so vivid he could almost feel the warmth of her embrace. "Stay with us, Bill." Tom's voice cut through the fog. "The chopper's almost here. You're going to be okay." Bill forced his eyes open, blinking against the harsh sunlight. The steady thump-thump of helicopter blades filled the air, growing louder by the second. As the Coast Guard chopper descended, its downdraft creating a maelstrom of spray around the small fishing boat, Bill felt a sense of surreal detachment. Was this really happening? Had he truly survived an encounter with one of nature's most perfect predators? The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Coast Guard medics rappelled down to the boat, quickly assessing Bill's condition and preparing him for transport. He was carefully loaded into a rescue basket and hoisted up to the waiting helicopter. As they lifted off, Bill caught a final glimpse of Jack and Tom on their boat below. These two men, strangers just hours ago, had risked their lives to save him. He made a silent vow to thank them properly if he survived this ordeal. In the helicopter, the medics worked efficiently to stabilize him. An IV was inserted, pumping much-needed fluids into his system. His arm was properly bandaged, the bleeding finally under control. "You're one lucky son of a gun," one of the medics shouted over the noise of the rotors. "Not many people survive a shark attack like that." Bill managed a weak nod. Lucky wasn't exactly how he felt at the moment, but he understood what the medic meant. He had stared death in the face and lived to tell the tale. As they raced towards the hospital, Bill's thoughts turned once again to his family. He imagined the scene that must be unfolding at home. The police car pulling up, an officer approaching the door with news that would shatter the peace of a normal afternoon. He silently willed the helicopter to fly faster. He needed to let Sarah know he was alive, that he was coming home to her. The coast slipped by below them, the familiar landmarks of the Outer Banks passing in a blur. In what seemed like no time at all, they were descending towards the hospital helipad. As they touched down, Bill saw a team of doctors and nurses rushing towards them, ready to take over his care. This was it. The moment when his fate would truly be decided. Would he keep his arm? Would he ever be able to return to the water that had been such a central part of his life? As he was wheeled into the emergency room, the bright lights and cacophony of urgent voices overwhelming his senses, Bill clung to one thought. He was alive. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles he would have to overcome, he had been given a second chance at life. The shark may have taken his sense of security, may have left him battered and broken, but it hadn't taken everything. Bill Thompson had survived, and in that survival, he found a strength he never knew he possessed. As the doctors began their work, Bill finally allowed himself to close his eyes. The nightmare beneath the waves was over. Now, a new chapter of his life was beginning, one of healing, of rediscovery, and of profound gratitude for the precious gift of life. The last thing Bill heard before succumbing to the anesthesia was a doctor's voice, calm and reassuring. "You're going to be okay, Mr. Thompson. You're safe now." And with those words echoing in his mind, Bill Thompson slipped into a deep, dreamless sleep, leaving behind the terrors of the deep and embracing the promise of a new dawn. The sterile halls of Outer Banks Hospital echoed with the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment and the hushed voices of staff. In room 412, Bill Thompson lay propped up in bed, his left arm heavily bandaged and suspended in a sling. The past week had been a blur of surgeries, pain medication, and fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares of dark shapes moving beneath the waves. Sarah sat beside him, her hand gently clasping his uninjured one, her thumb tracing small circles on his skin. The television droned softly in the background, a local news channel reporting on recent shark sightings along the coast. And in light of the recent attacks, local authorities are considering extending the beach closure. Bill's eyes snapped to the screen, his body tensing involuntarily. Sarah noticed and quickly reached for the remote, turning off the TV. "You don't need to hear that right now," she said softly, concern etching her features. Bill sighed, closing his eyes briefly. "I can't hide from it forever, Sarah. It happened. Pretending it didn't won't make it go away." Before Sarah could respond, there was a gentle knock at the door. Dr. Reeves entered, a cautiously optimistic smile on his face. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. How are we feeling today?" Bill managed a weak smile. "Better, I think. The pain's not as bad." Dr. Reeves nodded, pulling up a chair. "That's good to hear. I've been reviewing your latest test results, and I think we're ready to start talking about your rehabilitation plan." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with hope. "That's wonderful news, isn't it, Bill?" Bill nodded, but his expression remained guarded. "What exactly does that mean, Doc? Will I be able to use my arm again?" Dr. Reeves's face grew serious. "I want to be clear, Mr. Thompson. The damage to your arm was extensive. We've managed to save it, but you're looking at a long and challenging road ahead. With dedicated physical therapy, we're hopeful you can regain significant function, but it's unlikely you'll ever have 100% of your previous strength and mobility." The words hung heavy in the air. Bill felt a lump form in his throat, the full reality of his situation sinking in. Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. What about going back in the water?" Bill asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Reeves leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Physically, once you've healed and regained your strength, there's no reason you couldn't. But Mr. Thompson, the psychological impact of what you've been through can't be understated. Many survivors of shark attacks struggle with PTSD and a fear of returning to the ocean. It's something you'll need to work through, possibly with the help of a therapist." Bill nodded slowly, his mind racing. The thought of never feeling the gentle rock of his kayak, of never again casting a line into the deep blue waters he'd loved all his life, was almost unbearable. "When can we start the rehab?" he asked, a hint of determination creeping into his voice. Dr. Reeves smiled. "We can begin some gentle exercises today, actually. I'll have a physical therapist come by this afternoon to get you started." As the doctor left, Sarah turned to Bill, her eyes searching his face. "What are you thinking, honey?" Bill was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the window where he could just make out a sliver of the ocean in the distance. "I'm thinking, I'm not going to let this beat me, Sarah, I can't." Sarah leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. "And you won't. We'll get through this together, one day at a time." The afternoon brought Bill's first physical therapy session. Lisa, a cheerful woman in her 30s, entered the room with a warm smile and a bag full of equipment. "Ready to get started, Mr. Thompson?" she asked, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. Bill nodded, a mix of anticipation and apprehension churning in his stomach. "As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose." Lisa began by carefully removing Bill's arm from the sling. Even this small movement sent shockwaves of pain through his body, causing him to grimace. "Easy does it," Lisa soothed. "We're going to start very, very gently. Today we're just going to work on some passive range of motion exercises." For the next hour, Lisa guided Bill through a series of small movements, carefully manipulating his injured arm. Each motion, no matter how slight, seemed to awaken new levels of pain Bill hadn't thought possible. "You're doing great, Mr. Thompson," Lisa encouraged. "I know it hurts, but this is how we start rebuilding your strength and mobility." By the end of the session, Bill was exhausted, his shirt soaked with sweat. But beneath the fatigue and pain there was a small spark of accomplishment. He had taken the first step on his long road to recovery. As Lisa packed up her equipment, Bill turned to her. "Be honest with me. How long before I can do normal things again?" Lisa paused, considering her words carefully. "Everyone's recovery is different, Mr. Thompson, but given the extent of your injuries, we're looking at several months of intensive therapy at least. It's going to be hard work, and there will be days when you'll want to give up. But if you stick with it, you can make significant progress." Bill nodded, absorbing the information. "Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate your honesty." After Lisa left, Sarah helped Bill settle back into bed. She could see the toll the therapy session had taken on him, both physically and emotionally. "You did so well today, honey," she said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "I'm so proud of you." Bill managed a small smile. "It's just the beginning, Sarah. I've got a long way to go." As the day wore on, Bill found himself drifting in and out of sleep. His dreams were a chaotic mix of memories and fears. He saw himself back on his kayak, the sun warm on his face, the gentle lapping of waves a soothing melody. Then in an instant, the peaceful scene would shatter. The water would turn dark, a massive shape rising from the depths, jaws open wide. Bill jerked awake, his heart pounding. The room was dim, the last rays of sunlight fading outside his window. Sarah had dozed off in the chair beside him, her hand still resting on the bed near his. As his breathing slowed, Bill became aware of a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices and hurried footsteps approached his room. Suddenly, his door burst open, and a frantic-looking man rushed in. "Are you Bill Thompson?" the man asked, his eyes wild. "The one who survived the shark attack?" Sarah startled awake, quickly placing herself between the stranger and Bill's bed. "Who are you? You can't just barge in here." The man ran a shaking hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I had to talk to someone who understands. I'm Mike Callahan. I was attacked yesterday off Pea Island." Bill felt a chill run down his spine. "Another attack? So soon?" Mike nodded, his face pale and drawn. "They said on the news that you'd been attacked last week. I needed to talk to someone who knows what it's like. The doctors, the nurses, they're all kind, but they don't really understand." Bill gestured for Mike to come closer. As the young man approached, Bill could see the heavy bandages on his right leg. "How bad?" Bill asked softly. Mike sank into a chair, his eyes haunted. "Bad enough. Lost a chunk of my calf. Doctor says I might not get full use of my leg back. But I'm alive, which is more than I thought I'd be when that thing came at me." For the next hour, Bill and Mike talked, sharing their experiences in a way they couldn't with anyone else. They spoke of the terror, the pain, the moment when they each thought it was the end. But they also spoke of survival, of the strange gratitude they felt for every breath, every heartbeat. As they talked, Bill felt something shift inside him. The fear and helplessness that had plagued him since the attack began to give way to something else, a sense of purpose. "Listen, Mike," Bill said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "We're going to get through this. Both of us. It's going to be hard, and there will be days when we want to give up. But we're survivors. We've already beaten the odds once. We can do it again." Mike nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I was starting to think I'd never feel normal again." Bill reached out with his good hand, clasping Mike's shoulder. "We might not ever be the same as we were before, but we're still here. We still have a chance to live, to heal, to maybe even help others who've been through what we have." As Mike left, promising to stay in touch, Sarah turned to Bill, her eyes shining with pride and love. "You amazed me, you know that? After everything you've been through and you're still thinking of how to help others." Bill smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since before the attack. I think maybe this is how I start to heal, Sarah. Not just physically, but in here." He tapped his chest, "By remembering that I'm not alone in this, and that maybe my experience can help someone else." As night fell over the hospital, Bill Thompson drifted off to sleep, his dreams no longer haunted by the terrors of the deep. Instead, he saw himself standing on a beach, the sun warm on his face, the ocean stretching out before him. But this time, he wasn't alone. Sarah was beside him, and behind them stood others. Mike, Dr. Reeves, Lisa, Jack, and Tom, all those who had been part of his journey. In his dream, Bill took a step towards the water, then another. The fear was still there, a shadow at the edge of his consciousness. But it no longer paralyzed him. He was moving forward, one step at a time, towards healing, towards hope, towards a future that, while forever changed, was still bright with possibility. The final struggle was far from over. The road to recovery would be long and challenging, but as Bill Thompson slept, a small smile on his face, he knew that he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. He had survived the unsurvivable, and in doing so, had discovered a strength he never knew he possessed. The shark may have taken much from him, but it hadn't taken everything. Bill Thompson was still here, still fighting, still alive, and that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. The early morning sun filtered through the blinds of Bill Thompson's hospital room, casting long shadows across the sterile white floor. It had been 3 weeks since the shark attack that had nearly claimed his life, and today marked a significant milestone in his recovery. He was finally being discharged. Bill sat on the edge of his bed, his legs dangling over the side as Sarah helped him button up a loose-fitting shirt. His left arm, still heavily bandaged, hung in a sling across his chest. The simple act of dressing, once taken for granted, now required concentrated effort and assistance. "You okay, honey?" Sarah asked, noticing the furrow in Bill's brow. He nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, it's a lot, it's a lot. Going home, facing the real world again." Sarah cupped his cheek gently. "We'll take it one step at a time. You're not alone in this." A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Dr. Reeves entered, followed by Lisa, the physical therapist who had been working with Bill. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Dr. Reeves greeted, a warm smile on his face. "Ready for the big day?" Bill took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose." Dr. Reeves nodded understandingly. "I know it's overwhelming, but remember, this is a positive step. You've made remarkable progress in the past few weeks." Lisa stepped forward, holding out a folder. "I've prepared a detailed physical therapy plan for you to continue at home. We'll have sessions 3 times a week at the outpatient clinic, but it's crucial that you do your exercises daily." Bill accepted the folder with his good hand, the weight of it seeming to represent the long road still ahead of him. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." As Dr. Reeves went over the final discharge instructions, a commotion in the hallway caught their attention. The door burst open, and Jack and Tom, the fishermen who had rescued Bill, tumbled in, slightly out of breath. "We didn't miss it, did we?" Jack asked, his weathered face creased with concern. Sarah laughed, the tension in the room dissipating slightly. "No, you're just in time. We were about to head out." Tom stepped forward, holding out a small package. We got you something. For when you're ready to come back to the water." Bill unwrapped the gift with Sarah's help, revealing a sleek, compact personal locator beacon. The device was small enough to clip onto a life vest but powerful enough to send out a distress signal detectable by satellites. "We figured," Jack explained, his voice gruff with emotion. "Next time you're out there, you'll have a better way to call for help if you need it." Bill felt a lump form in his throat. The gift represented more than just a safety device. It was a vote of confidence, a belief that he would one day return to the ocean he loved. "Thank you," he managed, his voice thick. This means a lot." As the group made their way out of the hospital, Bill in a wheelchair pushed by an orderly, they were met by a small crowd of reporters and curious onlookers. News of the shark attack survivors' discharge had spread, and the local media was eager for a statement. "Mr. Thompson, how does it feel to be going home?" one reporter called out. "Are you planning to return to the water?" another shouted. Bill felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention, but Sarah squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. Taking a deep breath, he addressed the crowd. "I'm grateful to be alive and to be going home," he began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "The road to recovery is long, but I'm determined to face it head-on. As for returning to the water," he paused, glancing at Sarah, then at Jack and Tom. "That's a bridge I'll cross when I come to it. For now, I'm focusing on healing and on thanking the incredible people who saved my life and have supported me through this ordeal." As they made their way to Sarah's car, Bill couldn't help but notice the way people stared at his injured arm. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he never had before. The car ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about the challenges that lay ahead. Pulling into the driveway of their modest beachfront home, Bill felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The familiar sight of the house with its weathered shingles and cheery blue shutters was comforting. But the sound of the waves crashing on the nearby shore sent a shiver down his spine. Sarah helped Bill out of the car and up the front steps. As they entered the living room, Bill was surprised to find it filled with friends and neighbors. A banner reading "Welcome Home, Bill" hung across the fireplace. "Surprise!" the group cheered, their faces beaming with genuine joy at his return. Bill felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. He saw familiar faces from the local fishing community, colleagues from the hardware store where he worked part-time, and even Mike Callahan, the young man who had been attacked shortly after him. As Bill made his way through the crowd, accepting hugs and well wishes, he caught sight of the ocean through the large picture window. The waves rolled in relentlessly, a constant reminder of the power and unpredictability of nature. For a moment he felt a surge of panic, the memory of the attack vivid in his mind. Mike noticed Bill's discomfort and made his way over. "It gets easier," he said quietly, nodding towards the window. "Slowly, but it does." Bill managed a weak smile. "I hope you're right. How are you doing?" Mike shrugged, gesturing to his own injured leg. "Taking it day by day. The physical therapy's tough, but I'm making progress. It helps, knowing I'm not alone in this." As the afternoon wore on, the crowd thinned, leaving just close family and friends. Bill found himself sitting on the back porch, staring out at the ocean. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was a view he had admired countless times before, but now it felt different, tainted by his experience. Sarah joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Bill sighed, leaning into her embrace. "I'm trying to reconcile it all. The beauty of it, the peace I've always felt out there, with the terror of that day. I don't know if I can ever look at the ocean the same way again." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her fingers gently stroking his arm. "Maybe you're not supposed to," she said finally. "Maybe this experience changes how you see it, but that doesn't mean you can't find a new way to appreciate it, to coexist with it." Bill nodded slowly, considering her words. I feel like I've lost a part of myself out there. The man I was before the attack, he's gone." "He's not gone," Sarah said firmly. "He's changed, yes. But the core of who you are, your strength, your kindness, your love for life, that's still here. We'll find a way to bring that man back." even if he looks a little different now. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Bill felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with physical pain and emotional hurdles. But he wasn't facing it alone. He had Sarah, his friends, his community, and a newfound inner strength he was only beginning to discover. The next few weeks settled into a routine of physical therapy sessions, doctor's appointments, and quiet days at home. Bill threw himself into his exercises with determination, pushing through the pain and frustration. There were good days when he could see progress, when he could lift his arm a little higher or hold a cup without his hand shaking. But there were also bad days when the pain seemed insurmountable and the future looked bleak. One particularly difficult afternoon after a grueling therapy session that left him exhausted and discouraged, Bill found himself drawn to the beach. He hadn't ventured near the water since returning home, but something compelled him to face his fears. Sarah watched from the porch as Bill made his way slowly down the sandy path. She wanted to rush to his side to support him, but she knew this was something he needed to do on his own. Bill's feet sank into the soft sand as he approached the water's edge. The rhythmic sound of the waves, once so soothing, now sent his heart racing. He stopped a few feet from where the water lapped at the shore, his good hand clenched into a fist at his side. For a long moment he stood there staring out at the vast expanse of the Atlantic. The late afternoon sun glinted off the water, creating a dazzling display of light and color. It was beautiful, undeniably so. But Bill couldn't shake the undercurrent of fear that coursed through him. "I won't let you win," he said softly, his words carried away by the sea breeze. "You took something from me, but I'm still here. I'm still fighting." As if in response, a particularly large wave crashed against the shore, sending water surging towards his feet. Bill stumbled backward, his heart pounding. But as the water receded, leaving foam and seashells in its wake, he felt something shift inside him. He took a tentative step forward, then another, until the cool water swirled around his ankles. The sensation was both familiar and foreign, comforting and terrifying. Bill closed his eyes, focusing on the feel of the sand beneath his feet, the salt spray on his face, the warmth of the sun on his skin. "I'm not ready to give you up," he whispered to the ocean. "Not yet. Not ever." From the porch, Sarah watched as Bill stood in the shallows, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. She saw the tension in his shoulders slowly ease, saw him lift his face to the sky in a gesture of acceptance or perhaps defiance. In that moment, she knew that while the road ahead would be long and difficult, Bill would find his way back, not to who he was before, but to a new version of himself, stronger and more resilient than ever. As the weeks turned into months, Bill's progress became more noticeable. He graduated from simple exercises to more complex movements, each small victory celebrated by his supportive network of family and friends. The sling came off, revealing an arm that, while scarred, was slowly regaining its strength and mobility. One sunny Saturday morning, about 6 months after the attack, Bill stood in the garage running his hand over the smooth surface of his kayak. It had been repaired, the puncture marks from the shark's teeth filled and sanded away. But like Bill himself, it bore the invisible scars of that fateful day. Sarah found him there, lost in thought. "Thinking about going out?" she asked softly. Bill turned to her, a mix of longing and apprehension in his eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I don't know if I'll ever be truly ready, you know." Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of emotions her husband was grappling with. "What does your heart tell you?" Bill was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on the kayak. "It tells me that I can't let fear dictate my life, that the ocean has been a part of me for too long to let it go now. But it also tells me to be smart, to be cautious." Sarah smiled, a hint of tears in her eyes. "Then I think you have your answer." Together, they loaded the kayak onto the car and drove to a quiet stretch of beach. As Bill prepared to launch, he felt a familiar rush of excitement tinged with a new, sharp edge of anxiety. He clipped the personal locator beacon Jack and Tom had given him to his life vest, its weight a comforting reminder of the support he had. "You don't have to go far," Sarah reminded him, helping him steady the kayak in the shallows. "Just to that first buoy and back, okay?" Bill nodded, taking a deep breath as he settled into the seat. The feel of the paddle in his hands, the gentle rock of the kayak on the waves, it all came rushing back to him, muscle memory kicking in despite the months away. With a final look at Sarah, Bill pushed off, his strokes tentative at first, but growing stronger as he moved further from shore. The water sparkled in the morning sun, schools of small fish darting beneath the surface. As he approached the buoy, Bill felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. He had done it. He had faced his fear and come out the other side. Turning back towards the beach, Bill saw Sarah waiting for him, her hand shielding her eyes as she watched his progress. And beyond her, he noticed a small crowd had gathered. Jack and Tom, Mike Callahan, Lisa the physical therapist, and several of his friends from the local fishing community. They were all there, silently supporting him in this crucial step of his recovery. As Bill's kayak touched the sand, a cheer went up from the group. Hands reached out to help him, to pat him on the back, to welcome him home. And as Bill stood on the beach, surrounded by the people who had helped him through the darkest period of his life, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Pure, unadulterated joy. The shark attack had changed him. There was no denying that. The scars on his arm and the occasional twinge of pain would always be reminders of that terrifying day. But standing there with the taste of salt on his lips and the sound of the waves in his ears, Bill Thompson knew that he had reclaimed a part of himself he feared was lost forever. He turned to face the ocean, no longer seeing it as just a place of danger, but once again as a source of life, of adventure, of endless possibility. The fear was still there, a quiet whisper in the back of his mind, but it no longer controlled him. He had faced the depths and emerged, not unscathed, but undefeated. As the group began to disperse, making plans for a celebratory barbecue later that day, Bill took Sarah's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you," he said softly, "for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with pride and love. "Always," she replied. "We're in this together, remember?" Bill nodded, casting one last glance at the ocean before turning towards home. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges to face, more fears to overcome. But he was ready for them, stronger now than he had ever been before. As they walked up the beach, the sound of the waves a constant, soothing presence, Bill Thompson felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had survived the unsurvivable, had stared death in the face and lived to tell the tale. And in doing so, he had discovered a resilience he never knew he possessed. The shark may have taken a piece of him that day, but it had given him something in return, a newfound appreciation for life, for love, and for the indomitable spirit of the human heart. And that, Bill realized, was a gift beyond measure. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Bill Thompson eased himself out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah. He padded softly to the bathroom, wincing slightly as he flexed his left arm. A year had passed since the shark attack, but the physical reminders remained. A web of scars tracing across his arm and shoulder, and the occasional twinge of pain that shot through his muscles on cold mornings like this one. Bill stared at his reflection in the mirror, tracing the scars with his fingers. They had faded from angry red to a silvery white, but they were still there, a permanent testament to his brush with death. He flexed his arm, marveling at how far he'd come. The countless hours of physical therapy, the frustration, the tears, it had all led to this moment. He wasn't back to 100%, might never be, but he had regained most of the function in his arm. As he got dressed, Bill's eyes fell on the calendar hanging on the bedroom wall. Today's date was circled in red, exactly 1 year since the attack. He had been dreading this day, unsure of how to mark such a complex anniversary. Sarah stirred in bed, her eyes fluttering open. "You're up early," she murmured, sitting up. Bill nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about, Sarah reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I know, honey. How are you feeling?" Bill was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Grateful," he finally said. "Scared, proud. It's all mixed up in there." Sarah pulled him into a gentle embrace. "That's okay. You're allowed to feel all of those things. What do you want to do today?" Bill took a deep breath. I think I want to go to the beach." Face it head on, you know? Sarah nodded, a mixture of concern and pride in her eyes. Okay, we'll do it together. After a quiet breakfast, Bill and Sarah made their way down to the beach. The morning was cool, a light breeze carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. As they approached the water's edge, Bill felt his heart rate increase. The sound of the waves, once so soothing, now carried an undercurrent of threat. They stood in silence for a while, watching the waves roll in. Bill's mind wandered back to that fateful day, the initial strike, the struggle in the water, the searing pain as the shark's teeth tore into his flesh. He shuddered involuntarily. "You okay?" Sarah asked, squeezing his hand. Bill nodded. "Yeah, just remembering. It's so vivid, even now." As they stood there, lost in thought, a familiar voice called out behind them. "Bill? Sarah? I thought I might find you here." They turned to see Dr. Reeves approaching, a friendly smile on his face. The doctor had become more than just a medical professional over the past year. He had become a friend, a steady presence throughout Bill's recovery. "Dr. Reeves," Bill greeted him. Bill, surprised. "What brings you out here?" The doctor's smile softened. "I remembered what today was. Thought you might appreciate some company. If you'd rather be alone, though, I understand." Bill shook his head. "No, please join us. It's good to see you." As they walked along the shoreline, Dr. Reeves turned to Bill. "How have you been, really? And I'm not asking as your doctor right now." Bill considered the question. "It's been a journey. Some days are better than others. The physical pain, that's manageable now. But the psychological scars, those are taking longer to heal." Dr. Reeves nodded understandingly. "That's normal, Bill. Trauma like what you experienced, it doesn't just go away. It's something you learn to live with, to integrate into your life story." They paused, watching a group of seagulls swoop and dive over the waves. "You know," Bill said slowly, "I used to look at the ocean and see nothing but beauty and possibility. Now I see danger lurking beneath the surface. I hate that it's changed for me." Sarah wrapped an arm around his waist. "Maybe it's not about going back to how you saw it before. Maybe it's about finding a new way to appreciate it, with all its complexity." Dr. Reeves nodded in agreement. "Sarah's right. Your perspective has changed because you've changed. The key is finding a way to reconcile your love for the ocean with your newfound awareness of its dangers." As they continued their walk, they came across a small tidal pool. Bill crouched down, peering into the miniature ecosystem. Tiny fish darted between swaying strands of seaweed, and a small crab scuttled across the sandy bottom. "Life goes on," Bill murmured, more to himself than the others. "Even after everything, life finds a way." Dr. Reeves crouched beside him. "That's right. And so do we, Bill. We adapt, we grow, we find new ways to thrive." As the morning wore on, more familiar faces began to appear on the beach. Jack and Tom, the fishermen who had saved Bill's life, arrived with their families. Mike Callahan, the young man who had been attacked shortly after Bill, made his way over, walking with only a slight limp now. Soon, a small crowd had gathered. Someone had brought a grill, and the smell of cooking food filled the air. Children played in the sand, their laughter a stark contrast to the somber reason for the gathering. Bill found himself at the center of it all, accepting hugs and well wishes from friends and neighbors. The support of his community had been a crucial part of his recovery, and he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. As the impromptu beach party continued, Bill noticed a woman he didn't recognize standing at the edge of the group, watching the proceedings with interest. He made his way over to her, curious. "Hi there," he greeted her. "I don't think we've met. I'm Bill Thompson." The woman smiled, extending her hand. "Emily Larson. I'm a marine biologist with the Coastal Studies Institute. I hope you don't mind me crashing your gathering." Bill shook his head. "Not at all. What brings you here?" Emily's expression turned serious. "I've been studying the increase in shark activity along this coastline. Your attack and the others that followed, they're part of a larger pattern we're trying to understand." Bill felt a chill run down his spine. "More attacks?" "I hadn't heard." Emily nodded. There have been a few close calls, but thankfully nothing as severe as what you went through. We're trying to figure out why the sharks are coming closer to shore, if it's related to changes in their food sources or water temperatures." As they talked, Bill found himself fascinated by Emily's work. She explained the delicate balance of the ocean ecosystem, how changes in one area could have far-reaching effects on another. "The sharks," Emily said, "they're not monsters. They're apex predators doing what they've evolved to do over millions of years. But as human activity impacts their habitat, it brings us into closer contact with them." Bill nodded slowly, processing this information. "I understand that intellectually, but emotionally, it's harder to reconcile." Emily placed a hand on his arm. "What you went through was traumatic, and no one would blame you for being afraid. But understanding these creatures, their role in the ecosystem, it can help. Fear often comes from the unknown." As the afternoon wore on, Bill found himself drawn back to the water's edge. The tide was coming in, waves crashing with more force against the shore. He stood there, toes digging into the wet sand, feeling the pull of the receding water. Sarah joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" Bill was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I'm not ready to give it up. The ocean, I mean. It's been such a big part of my life for so long. I don't want the attack to take that away from me." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Then don't let it. You've come so far, Bill. You're stronger than you know." As if on cue, Jack approached, carrying something large wrapped in a tarp. "Bill," he called out, "we've got something for you." Bill turned, curious. Jack set the object down and pulled back the tarp, revealing a sleek new kayak. Bill's breath caught in his throat. "We all chipped in," Jack explained, gesturing to the gathered crowd. "Figured it was time you got back out there. If you're ready." Bill ran his hand along the smooth surface of the kayak, emotion welling up inside him. He looked around at the faces of his friends and neighbors, all watching him with a mixture of hope and concern. I don't know what to say," Bill stammered. "Thank you, all of you. Doctor." Reeves stepped forward. "You don't have to decide right now, Bill. It's here when you're ready, whether that's today, next week, or next year." Bill nodded, overwhelmed by the gesture. He turned back to the ocean, its vastness both intimidating and inviting. Could he do it? Could he push past the fear and reclaim his love for the water? As if in answer to his unspoken question, a pod of dolphins appeared in the distance, their sleek bodies arcing gracefully out of the water. The crowd murmured in appreciation at the sight. Emily, the marine biologist, stepped up beside Bill. "You see? The ocean is full of wonders. Yes, there are dangers, but there's also incredible beauty in life." Bill watched the dolphins, feeling something shift inside him. The fear was still there, a low hum in the back of his mind, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it was tempered by a renewed sense of awe and respect for the power and majesty of the ocean. Taking a deep breath, Bill turned to the group. "I want to try," he said, his voice stronger than he expected. "Not far, just to get my feet wet, so to speak." A cheer went up from the crowd. Sarah hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you," in his ear. As they prepared the kayak, Bill felt a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. He pulled on his life vest, clipping the personal locator beacon Jack and Tom had given him months ago to the front. Just before he pushed off, Mike Callahan approached. "You've got this, Bill," he said, his eyes shining with understanding. "We've both faced the worst and come out the other side. You're not alone out there." Bill nodded gratefully, then turned to face the water. With a deep breath, he pushed the kayak into the shallows and climbed in. The familiar feel of the paddle in his hands brought back a rush of memories, both good and bad. As he paddled out, the cheers of his friends and family fading behind him, Bill felt a sense of peace settle over him. The rhythmic motion of paddling, the gentle rock of the kayak on the waves, it all came back to him, as natural as breathing. He didn't go far, just past the breakers where the water turned a deep, clear blue. There he sat for a while, bobbing gently on the swells. He thought about the past year, the pain, the fear, the long nights when sleep eluded him. But he also thought about the strength he'd discovered within himself, the unwavering support of his loved ones, and the resilience of the human spirit. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Bill turned his kayak back toward shore. He could see the crowd still gathered on the beach waiting for him. Sarah stood at the water's edge, her hand shielding her eyes as she watched his approach. With smooth, confident strokes, Bill guided the kayak back to land. As the bow touched the sand, hands reached out to steady him, to welcome him back. He climbed out on slightly shaky legs, immediately enveloped in Sarah's embrace. "You did it," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Bill nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. He had done it. He had faced his fear, had ventured back into the domain of the creature that had nearly taken his life. And in doing so, he had reclaimed a piece of himself he thought was lost forever. As the group began to disperse, plans being made for a celebratory dinner, Bill took one last look at the ocean. The fear was still there, a quiet whisper in the back of his mind. But it no longer controlled him. Instead, it had become a part of him, integrated into his new understanding of the world and his place in it. The scars on his arm would always be there, a permanent reminder of that fateful day. But they were no longer just marks of trauma. They had become symbols of survival, of resilience, of the indomitable human spirit. Bill Thompson had been changed by his encounter with the shark. There was no denying that. But as he stood on the beach, surrounded by the people who had supported him through his darkest days, he realized that change wasn't always a bad thing. He was stronger now, more appreciative of life's precious moments, more connected to his community. As he turned to join the others, Bill's hand unconsciously went to the scars on his arm. They would always be a part of him. These marks left by nature's perfect predator, but they no longer defined him. He was more than a shark attack survivor. He was a husband, a friend, a member of a community. He was a man who had faced his deepest fears and emerged on the other side, battered but unbroken. The ocean would always hold an element of danger, but it would also always be a source of wonder and life. And Bill Thompson, with his scars and his newfound strength, was ready to embrace it all.